Food is a cornerstone of our families, our communities, and our country. And it's something that's on all of our minds right now. But with all of the uncertainty in the world, Canadian food is one thing we can be certain about. Thanks to you, all of you. From those who produce, to those who process, to those who get it on our plate. Canadians never shy away from a challenge. We always answer the call. Every Canadian has a role to play, and ours remains unchanged, providing safe, healthy food to Canada and the world. Food has always mattered to Canadians, but never has it mattered more. And even in times where the distance feels greater, food still brings us together. Thank you for your service.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to the Modern Family Farm Transition, brought to you by Farm Credit Canada. That actually sounds like a TV show, the Modern Family Farm Transition. We've experienced a whole lot of uncertainty over the past year or so, that goes without saying, and Dr. Tom Deans is going to join us here in a few minutes to help us gain back a little bit of certainty about our future plans, and your future plans for the farm business. My name is Kevin Stewart from AgVision Media, and it really is my pleasure to be, I don't know, your tour guide, I guess, for this particular event over the next 90 minutes or so. My background real quick is that I have worked as a journalist, as a farmer, as a keynote speaker all of my life. And like the rest of you, the last year has been pretty disruptive. It's been really different, hasn't it? And so I've been fortunate to use the last year to research the problems that fake news has created for us and developed a keynote about fake news and its impact on our mental health. But I have to tell you, my main claim to fame is that I grew up on a farm and farmed with my dad in southwestern Ontario. And something that is actually very significant about our farm is that these lands are the traditional lands, actually, of four really unique groups of people: the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenapeewuk, and the Attawandaron peoples. And so I mention that really just because, especially now, but it's at all times, I believe, it's important to recognize all Indigenous peoples in this great country of ours. In the past couple of years, Farm Credit Canada has created a team called the Advisory Services to help farm families navigate through farm business transitions. It's a complimentary service, and farm business advisors are available right across the country to listen to you, to ask important questions. They can help you start the succession conversation, define your goals, and eliminate some of those barriers. It is really great to have Dr. Tom Deans back with us again. If you've joined us on these types of sessions over the last number of months, you know that Tom has been a part of those. He is a best-selling author. He's an award-winning speaker. He's probably a #1 dad. I'm not really sure, but he's given thousands of keynotes speeches in many countries around the world on estate planning. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Tom Deans. And hey, nice to have you with us again.
Kevin, well, it's my pleasure, and I can't wait to dig into this conversation because now more than ever, this is so timely, isn't it?
Well, you know, and as a journalist, I had the pleasure of doing a television series, hosting a television series for more than a dozen years called AgVision. And I remember specifically, we did hundreds of these programs. And I think just about every one of those shows, we did a short segment that had something to do with succession planning. And after 20 years, you'd think that we'd be in pretty good shape by now on the succession front for farms, but tell us what the reality is.
Well, the reality is we're continuing to struggle with the conversation. I mean, this is culturally informed. It's always been difficult for families to talk about money, right? It always feels like one of those subjects where we can kind of just maybe push it off another month, another year, another decade. Like somehow we'll know when the time is right. And often no one is really compelling us to have these conversations. It's a conversation that must happen though. And you know, in your introduction, you talked about how we're in the middle of such interesting times, and we are. COVID has really amplified the very best of families and business together, and it has really amplified some of the challenges. It's really brought to the fore how difficult it can be for families to talk about the transition of a farm or the transition of family wealth. But the silver lining is we know that these conversations must be had because we have family that are, I would be shocked if there is not someone on this call who hasn't been touched in a very personal way by COVID, and a family member is either tested positive or ended up on a ventilator. And so it is real. Like the urgency is here and now. And so that's why I think today's call, I think FCC should be just a huge thank you to them for bringing this subject to the fore and then helping to facilitate families to have this important conversation now.
And, you know, when you say that, and this is not a judgment thing, but I often find it curious, partly because we went through it on our farm and I went through it with my father-in-law's farm. It's an odd thing. I don't know what word to call it, except maybe odd, that we keep our greatest gifts secret from those that we love and intend to support. And is that a generational thing? Is that just because we're so busy? Why do we do this? Why do we not get talking about this?
I think there's a couple of things at play. One is certainly superstition. There's still some people who believe that if they talk to their family about aging, the natural course of life, and ultimately dying, that if they write a will or share a copy of their will with their beneficiaries, that somehow they're asking for trouble, like they're going to accelerate something negative in their life. And so superstition continues, and all the public opinion research shows to be at the top of the list, followed by just a real intimidation, of all the areas that affect farmers. Estate planning especially is full of Latin. It's full of complicated jargon. And I have spent the last 15 years trying to uncomplicate and make this subject accessible for everyday Canadians, so that people feel comfortable starting the conversation. And because if they don't have the conversation, what we do know is that silence will continue to destroy family relationships and family farms from the inside out, from a place of fear and from a place of intimidation. So I just want to make it very clear right out of the gate that there is no bad estate plan except the one that is never put in place. And that's a good place to start. 12 million Canadians are missing the most important and basic document of an estate plan, and that's a will. So if there's only just one thing that comes from today's presentation, it will be that I create the urgency. Tomorrow, you can call your lawyer, book an appointment, and get that document in place. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can amend those wills, improve those wills, but just get it in place. And this applies to everyone over age of 18. There's a lot of misconception that you got to be 81 or 71, like wills and estate planning and farm succession planning is just for really old people. It's not. It's not, right?
Yes.
It's every Canadian over the age of 18. Whether you're G2, G3, or G1, it's important to get these basic documents in place and start to gather as a family and start to have these conversations, because surprises do not work well with farm transition. It's the families that bring predictability, transparency, lots of conversations, so everyone knows how it's going to work and when the farm is going to transition and how it's going to transition. Absolutely crucial.
I see the folks here at Farm Credit, they've actually done a bit of polling with the people who are on the call here today, or the connection, whatever we call this. And they're listing that 58% of the people on the call have a written will. So, I mean, that's encouraging that there's a start. And it's also encouraging that they're here knowing that there are some next steps that we need to take. Let's not leave this idea of wills just yet, because the statistics, we've all seen them before, of the second and third generation taking over the business and being successful. They're not that encouraging, quite frankly. And I think sometimes it's easy to blame those next generations, or maybe they don't know how to work, or maybe they're not passionate about the business or whatever. But I kind of want to step back from that a little bit. And do business owners need to own a little bit of that blame if there's no transition plan to get that next generation set up? Because as I said, I've been through this now with our family, and it's almost like tradition says that we have to make our kids wait for the parents to die to have any control over their financial future, at all. So Should the owners own some of this blame?
You're absolutely right, Kevin. It's an excellent question. Absolutely. I mean, with business ownership comes that responsibility to answer the question, where will this farming operation go? Where will this business go? It's going to go somewhere. And there's just a lot of mythology around this. There's some people who actually believe that if they mention to their surviving spouse that they want their farm to go to their eldest boy, which is an old traditional idea, they think that that's an estate plan. Well, that and $2 will get them a cup of coffee. That is not the way it works. If a farmer who owns a farming operation dies without a will, that's called dying intestate. And the province in which they live have a beautiful formula for chopping up that farm along with the canoe and barbecue, according to that provincial formula. So whether or not their kids are involved in the farming operation or not, they're going to be participating in the ownership. And that could be the furthest from anyone's mind, including the beneficiaries. Some beneficiaries, some children, some siblings may show no interest in the farm. But what's going to happen is that according to that provincial formula, those siblings are going to be thrust into business together as shareholders. And in many cases, that is a disaster waiting to happen. So, absolutely, in answer to your question, the business owner has the bulk of the responsibility to answer the question, how will this transition? And how will it impact my family when I'm not here? And by the way, when I say not here, I don't mean just not here physically. We have 1 in 3 Canadians over the age of 65 who are presenting some symptoms of dementia. So we think estate planning is just something that gets triggered by our death. The reality is it is being triggered by our incapacity, which includes mental incapacity. And that's, so we have powers of attorney, that legal document that will come into effect that put either a surviving spouse or family members in charge of making financial decisions on our behalf. That's estate planning. It's awfully important for families to get out in front of this and make these decisions, have these conversations, get the documents in place, and then do the one extra step, which is to share those documents with the people who will be impacted by those documents, by those decisions.
Yeah, I just want to remind the people, if you've joined us a little bit late, we encourage you to pop your questions into the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen if you have a question for Dr. Tom Dean. Farm Credit has left their poll open and they've just updated it here. So they're saying that 72% of the people on this connection do not have a written plan right now. So, which again highlights not only how important this topic is, but quite frankly, how much interest people have shown in this topic, especially in the last year and a half or so with the uncertainty created by COVID. Let me ask you a question. Do I call you Tom or Dr. Deans or just hey there? I don't know what to call. Okay. You have seen obviously a lot of farm succession situations, and I have too, being in the media. And one thing I wonder about, I'm not the one who knows, but sometimes when we have a lot of drama, sometimes if, maybe we make excuses because we haven't really made progress on succession, I've heard the line that, our situation is pretty unique. I don't know how you can generalize, but is that true, or are pretty well all, is it the same pattern that seems to happen in most situations?
Yeah, so certainly as a speaker, as an author, as someone who's done a lot of media work, I have seen patterns. And I often, when I'm doing book signings at, like you're listing Grand Prairie and all Moncton and all those great communities where I've spoken and I'm signing books, and someone does say that, I'd say like, listen, my story is very unique. And then they proceed to tell me a story that I've heard in some version many, many times before. There's a lot of people who feel isolated on a farm. They are weighed down by this issue. They think that they're the only one experiencing this burden of having to decode family relationships and how the farm is going to transition. And it's a scary, dark place for a lot of business owners. They've got all of this abundance. They've got the successful farming operation. And at a moment in time where they might be in their 60s or 70s or 80s and feeling really a sense of accomplishment, they're feeling the opposite. They're feeling worried and scared by the complexity of how this big thing is going to move, and what will it do? What will it do to family relationships? And so many of these people feel like they have to go through this alone. And part of my message is, you reference the FCC Advisory Services team. Well, they, along with other trusted advisors, really are crucial to taking away this fear, right? By helping an individual farming family start this conversation and put their plans in place and then implement it, right? I think the family farms that try to do this all on their own and master this, it's awfully hard. There's so many moving parts. There's legal considerations, tax considerations, and then the big one, emotions, right?
Yeah.
The soft stuff that is the hard stuff. And I think that's where having a third party in the room to manage these conversations it takes away the drama.
And having been a farmer most of my life and visited with so many farms from coast to coast, there is a pride that, and I mean it in a good way, the ability to be the jack of all trades, that you can do just about a million. You can weld a little bit, you can you're a bit of a mechanic, you do all these things, and that's great. And sometimes that spills over to this. We think, oh, I can handle this too. And I remember I started my own business. It's almost 25 years ago. We started this company. And the first thing that I established are what I call heroes. People that knew how to do stuff that I either had blind spots about. So I have a technology hero, I have a legal hero, I have an accounting hero. And anyway, I say all that because I feel like this is one of those areas, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's okay to have a hero, that you don't need to feel like you need to do this one yourself.
Well, Kevin, I would go one step further and say you absolutely can't do it on your own. This is the most complex and emotionally confusing business challenge that a farming family will confront. There's nothing like it. There are so many moving parts. And to really underline this point, a lot of people think this subject is really a tax problem or a tax issue. It's a tax challenge that there's, and I don't know, but let me tell you, there are accounting firms that try to do this on their own and mess up and mess up their succession plans. So there is something about having a third party who doesn't have a horse in the race, that can stand back and bring perspective and experience and context and guide that family through what is a really challenging moment in any farming family's history. And sadly, Kevin, there are some families that are doing such a great job of this, except we're not reading about them, right? The farming family that meets once a year with their advisor to prepare the next generation, to open up conversations around the sale of the farm and how that will be financed and when will it happen. No one wants to read that story of the successful family that does that. What do we read? What do we read about constantly? We read about the tragedy. We read about the heartbreak. We read about the failed farming operation where the neighbor picks off that family farm for pennies on the dollar. And that's become part of our cultural, I think, collective cultural experience, that the only way, we should transition the farm is just to, I don't know, let time unfold and let the family figure it out. I hear that all the time. Oh, the kids will figure it out. When I'm not here, the kids will figure it out. I'm thinking, holy smokes. What happens, of course, is that those siblings will hire lawyers, and it is the lawyers who are making the money off the backs of the hardworking family farms that just didn't know how to start the conversation. That's a tragedy, and it's preventable.
And I can see too where something like the FCC advisory thing is very handy, just to be that third person. I mean, it's sort of like, if I need to paint my shed, I don't usually go through the yellow pages and look for someone to do this. I start asking around, hey, do you know anybody who does a good job at this? And so to your point, in this area, because most of us have never done this before, we don't really know who to ask. Hey, have you had a good experience? Do you know somebody who's good at, X? I mean, I don't know if you've ever had anybody ask you that question. What sort of advice do you give when people say, I don't even know where to start? Who do I call first?
Well, look, FCC, has made it their business to know this business. I mean, they have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, what a phenomenal institutional resource to tap into. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. They have seen everything that is good and everything that has gone wrong in this subject called the transition of the farm. And I think just asking them for a primer, they can guide farming families in the right direction of other subspecialists, whether it's tax or accounting or, and I'm not kidding, psychotherapists or addiction counseling. Like, there's a lot of things going on the farm. And I think if there's one really bright spot, it's that there's no, I mean, the shame is moving aside and allowing, I think, farming families to talk about the very real challenges that are taking place right across this country in small communities. It is a hard business, arguably the hardest business of all on families, right? It's not just a business. You're living on the asset. The business is under their nails. It's their identity. It's their culture. It's who they are. And the transition of this thing that they're living on, that asset, feels so emotionally complex that there's often a lot of shame. And that shame is leading to isolation and tragedy. And I think the reality is, when families can do this transition well by leaning on third parties, when families get this right, look out. These are the most incredible families that I have met, because they've conquered this fear and they've reached out and they've said, I don't know how to do this. I need some help. Because they're only going to do this once every 25 or 30 years. Right? It's not like changing the oil on the tractor. You're doing it 4 times a year. This is once in 30. Who becomes an expert doing something once every 30 years?
Yeah, exactly right. Hey, you know what I want to do really here is just kind of have a bit of fun and just do a true false thing with you. So I'll read a statement and you just give me your opinion whether you think the statement is true or false. And again, while we're doing this, if you've joined us late, again, we encourage you to send in your questions for Dr. Dean about succession in your farm business. And again, just a reminder, you can remain anonymous. Okay, so let's try this. It's a little Q&A here, a little true or false. So I'm just going to throw these out here. True or false? Yeah, go ahead.
We, just for the audience benefit, we have not rehearsed it, so I have no idea what you're going to say.
You're not telling me you're getting nervous, are you? I've never seen you nervous before. Okay. All right. Well, the beauty is you can just ignore anything I say. That's kind of how this works. So, all right. So true or false, you should not gift your business to your kids, but you should sell it at full market value. True or false?
You should sell at full market value. True.
Why?
I think that when we take shortcuts with the valuation and offer discounts to the family, we damage the confidence of the next generation. We actually undermine their authenticity. When we ask people to pay market value, they are only going to do that if they believe in their own abilities to grow that farming operation based on their own intellect and hard work. That is how, plus their brothers and sisters who may be outside the farming operation are going to know that the full value is going to transfer to their parents. And when their parents pass away, typically every sibling is going to participate an equal amount. So no discounts. And this is based on 3 generations of our family businesses. We've always had to pay full market value. That's how families stay functional and talking. It's the discounts that cause the problem.
Oh, good intel. All right. I like that. Okay. So true or false? Making longevity an overriding business objective. Is that healthy or not healthy in the farm business? True or false?
I would say false. I think making the longevity of a business can set it's a very difficult standard. Like, is 100 years too soon? Is 125 better than 150? When do you stop? At some point, what I believe is every business has a certain life cycle. And I think the more profound question is where is that farming operation in its business cycle? And do we have the next generation who share the same kind of passion, drive, and ability as their parents to continue that business. And if they don't, then giving a business, a farming operation, to the next generation who is lacking one of those 3 or 4 components, that is like setting them up to fail. How can that build strong families and strong businesses and protect family wealth? Listen, if there's a next generation who doesn't have one of those things, strength, ability, creativity, drive, why would you transition a farm in that direction? They may have some other ability. Can you imagine gifting a farming operation to a son who really wanted to play in the NHL, who had the ability, the skill, the drive, but because he's the oldest boy, he's going to get the farm? You can see, I mean, that's a really extreme example. But there are many other types of examples. You know, next generation, they want to be a dentist, a lawyer, a doctor, something different than farming operation. That is not a failed family. That's not a failed family farm operation. There is no shame in selling a farm. Henry Ford's father was a farmer. Is that a story of a son who went on to build an extraordinary manufacturing business, or is that a story of a failed family farm? I mean, that's another extreme example to make the point that there is no shame or something diminished in the family if there's not a next gen who wants to continue the farming operation.
Okay, here's a line that I heard many years ago, and I really wasn't sure what to think about this. So, true or false, every family business must always be for sale.
True.
What does that mean?
I think when, you know, most of the people listening in are, whether they know it or not, they're both owner operators, right? They own the farm, but they're operating their farm. And I would say that the vast majority of farmers that I've met are spending 99% of their time on their operations, trying to figure out what crop to plant, when to harvest, pricing their inputs, looking for the best time to sell. Like all of that, that's operation, but they're owner operators. I would love to see farmers, owner operators, spend at least 50% of their time on their ownership, trying to figure out when and where and how to maximize the value of their business operation. And when they do that, when they spend time on that, they will come to understand that that is really how financially successful farming operations become more successful. They're either acquiring land at an opportune time because they're spending time on their ownership, or perhaps they're selling. But it takes work. And that's the piece that usually gets missed. That's the piece that usually gets the short shift, is the ownership.
Okay, final true. I don't know if this is technically a true or false. You can just tell me whether this is a wise statement or not a wise statement. And that is, my business is my legacy. What do you think of that?
Absolutely false. There is, I love, back in the day when I was doing live events, I would love to ask my live audience who the founder of Coca-Cola was. And whether I had 500 people or 1,000 people in my audience, it would be the same thing. It would be crickets. No one knew. Total silence. Coca-Cola is the third most valuable consumer brand in the world, and no one knows who the founder was. So the reality is, businesses are not legacies. It's actually not the thing that you'll be remembered for. What you'll be remembered for, and this is a little counterintuitive, is for the kind of person you were. I mean, what kind of father were you? What kind of community leader were you? These are where people leave impact, lasting impact. Where things get confusing is that when a family farm is gifted to the next generation for free via the estate, it's very difficult for that next generation to in turn then sell that business. It's very difficult to sell a gift, right? So they think that their business that they got for free, much like the silverware or a piece of art, must be passed on the same way it was passed on to them. So you can see how it gets hardwired. If I receive the farm as a gift, I must gift it forward in time. And this is causing tremendous heartbreak and confusion and wealth destruction, especially if you're passing it to someone, as I said earlier, who lacks the ambition or the ability or interest to be a farmer.
FCC is continuing to poll the audience here. So Dr. Deans, I'll get you may have to write some of this down because I'll go slow, but they're getting some interesting results from the poll. And so the question is, have you shared your intentions or expectations for the family farm's future with the family? And so 55% say yes, and we're all on the same page. 29, almost 30% say yes, and my family is not aligned. About 10% say no, but I am sure it will be fine. And finally, about 5 or 6% say no, and I know they will not be in agreement. Just your reaction to that.
I would really just comment on the last two, which are the places where we know there's likely going to be the biggest problems, right? This is where people are putting their faith in hope. I hope my kids figure this out. I hope they like the decision that I made in isolation of their ideas, right? And also people making assumptions. I'm going to leave them the farm. Who wouldn't love a free farm, right? Like, I got a free farm, they're going to love a free farm, but they're thinking really about themselves. The greatest gifts that we can give our family are the certainty, the predictability, the advanced conversation, so that there are no surprises, so that we're not left lawyering up and fighting in open court, by the way. These are not private court sessions. This is with the local community reporter in the courthouse reporting on family fighting over the farm. Like, we often get the very thing that we fear, right? Families are private. We love confidentiality. And what do we get when we don't build and share our plans with our family? We get the opposite. We get the thing that we were fearing. We get fighting and chaos, tax liabilities, failed family farms, no liquidity to pay the capital gains that are triggered on the sale of the farm when some last parent dies. Like, we get all the horror that we're worried about because we thought we could do it ourselves, go it alone. Or even worse, we thought that we knew when we were going to die and that we'd have plenty of time to get a lawyer, write a will, power of attorney, healthcare directive, get all those documents, put in place 5 minutes before we die. And then we'll have a meeting. Folks, it doesn't work that way. Ask Cecil Harris in 1948. Remember him? Right? Cecil Harris, who hopped on his tractor and found himself stuck in the middle of his field. And then he crawled off his tractor and gets pinned under the wheel. He's bleeding out. He dies. He scratches in, before he dies, he scratches into the fender, "I leave everything to the wife." That is the shortest legal will in the history of Canada. They cut the fender off the tractor. They submitted it to the probate court. Not everyone is as lucky as Cecil Harris to time their estate plan to the last minute.
Yeah, that's not an ideal. That's not an ideal way forward. You know what? You wrote a book, and the 12 common sense questions to protect your wealth. I want to ask you about a sample of those questions, but before I do, tell me a bit about some of the more memorable responses that you have had to some of those questions.
Well, that's an easy one, because I remember doing a CBC radio phone interview, and then of course the next day there was a lot of email traffic and phone call. I took a phone call from a very turned out to be a very prominent large business owner, and he asked to meet. He wanted to know if I could help the family. So I knew there was something going on in that family with the transition. And I met with them, and I went through the 12 questions in their boardroom, and I remember asking the father, who was in his 90s, okay? The father is in his 90s, and the son is in his early 70s. I go through the 12 questions, but I will never forget the answer to question number 2. I asked Dad in his 90s, "Are you prepared to sell this business, yes or no?" So these are yes and no questions. He says no. I'm thinking, okay, well, that's in itself not unique. Then I go to Junior, the son, and I say, "Are you prepared to buy this business? Yes or no?" And he says yes. So this is weird. I've got a buyer, the next generation, who wants to buy the business at full market value, but I have a father who doesn't want to sell, and he's in his 90s. So I go back to Dad and I go, "Listen, I'm not asking you to change your answer. I'm just really curious. Like, why don't you want to sell?" And he says, "Well, if I sold, I would have nothing to do. I love this business. I was the founder of this business. I love it. I love the people, and I love coming to the office. And then Junior goes, well, but if I bought this business from you, it doesn't mean that you would have to stay home. In fact, I would insist that you actually stay. People love you. The lenders, the bank loves you. The customers love you. You have all of this institutional knowledge that I want to retain. And then Dad goes, hang on. If I sold you this business, I could come in. Could I keep my same office? And Junior goes, of course you could. I learned that there was a buyer and seller in that business for goodness knows how long, maybe decades. They just didn't know how to start the conversation. When I was speaking in Grand Prairie, when I'm speaking in Moncton, when I'm speaking anywhere across this country, and in my audience, there are children who think the parents are going to give them the farm, and there are parents who think the kids are going to buy the farm, and no one knows how to start the conversation. And that is all that every family's business does. That's my book. That's all. The 12 questions are trying to start the most difficult conversation of all and give it some form and structure and make that conversation accessible. That's it.
Well, now we don't need to buy your book. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, the more you explain that, the more now I do want to see what some of those other questions and responses are.
Just wait for the movie, Kevin. Just wait for the movie.
Oh, the movie. Oh, even better. Oh, even better. I want to see who's going to star in your role there. Another poll here from Farm Credit asking the audience here, what do you need to help you take the first step? So about 14% said they need time. Very busy, obviously. About a third say they need family commitment. About 18% say they need technical advisors. About a third, and I think this is interesting, they need the energy to tackle this beast. Is it that painful?
Yeah, and you know, anything in life that is worth pursuing is usually difficult, right? Yeah. And out of that comes a phenomenal sense of relief. And I think families that work at this, families that arrive at the solution that's right for them, right? Not right for their neighbor or what their neighbor thinks or what the community is going to think, but right for them. That really says, you know, I love my kids. I want this business to help them or support them, or I want this business, if they don't want it, to transition to someone else. And we're going to do this, and we're going to do it well. It's our largest asset. We've got to get this right. And in order to do that, we're going to need some help. We're going to need some technical help. We're going to need some help starting this family conversation so that it doesn't go sideways and become full of drama, right? And I would make the point, Kevin, that by having a third person in the room while the family is talking about the farm transition, people behave. People, by and large, will actually behave really, really well when someone is there, like, right? It's when they're not there. It's when families try to go it alone at the kitchen table, like, okay, you know, Dad says, I want my son to have the business, or I want Jenny to have the business, and because they work harder than the kids that are off the farm. You can just see how people just lose their mind, and it feels so dangerous, and intuitively they don't have the conversation. So look, is fair equal? Is equal fair? There are ways to navigate that question and arrive at a solution that's right, predictably, right? Predictably get that plan in place and then properly papered so that you have wills, shareholder agreements, documents. There's no more surprises and no more family jockeying for position, right? Sibling rivalry, destroying the farm, right? Get rid of that nonsense by asking the question, answering the question. How will this farm transition? To whom, when, and at what price? Answer those three questions and watch your family barbecue return to the great days, right?
Wow.
Actually, people are actually enjoying each other's company because there's no more nonsense about how the farm is going to transition.
I actually heard a farmer say one time, and I thought this was pretty insightful. He said, you know, my succession plan will have been a success if my kids can have Christmas dinner together when this is all over with. I have a question here, and I need you to sort of maybe add some perspective to this because I'm not really sure I understand. The question that's come in is um, what should a family farm do when their operation can't afford a formal transition plan? Is a transition plan very expensive?
What I can tell you is that no transition plan is very, very expensive. Let me flip the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, hope, luck. Yeah, those are not plans. No, the farm succession plan itself is not expensive.
Okay.
There are people who don't get wills because they think wills are expensive. Like, why would I spend $500 on a will or $1,000 on a will when the province has a formula that will break up and divide the farm according to the provincial formula? I'll save $1,000. Meanwhile, they're going to, family members are going to incur hundreds of thousands of dollars of unnecessary probate fees and taxes and capital gains and legal fees. Like, seriously, this is not one place to cheap out and go to, I'm not going to pick on Staples, but an office supply company, a will kit, $20. Like, please do not do that. This is the one place where you need to do your research, ask other farmers. Who did you use to write your will? Were you happy with the product? Was there good price is what you pay, value is what you get? Did I get good value for the will? Did you understand what the document says? Were they easy to work with? Just like you would buy any input, do your research, ask other farmers for their experience, what they would do different, what they did well, what they would do, differently. That's just smart business.
What is your opinion on a family trust in estate planning?
I think of all the area of estate planning, trust, just the word trust is intimidating. There's a lot of people, there's many different types of trusts. People don't know when they should use them or what they look like or what they cost, or even other people who believe that trusts are really only reserved for the ultra wealthy. Look, let me give you a shortcut. We have a habit in this country, as do the Americans, of calling things that they actually are not. So if you're looking for a clue as to whether or not you should use a trust, it's usually when you're looking at your family and there is a lack of trust. If there's something going on in your family, maybe there is a concern around who your son or daughter married and their spending habits, or maybe there's concern around work ethic or addiction. And you're worried about what that farm, if it transitions to that next generation, will do, right? Because remember, inherited wealth, including a business, will release potential in the next generation, or it will accelerate demise. It won't do it will do one or the other, right? It's not going to equivocate. So the question is, if you're concerned about what that farm will do or wealth will do, then chances are that a trust is a good financial planning mechanism to help protect your wealth and protect the beneficiary as well. Protects both. Because sometimes people with addictions or people with spending problems can get better, right? They get better, and the trustee would then change, would have the flexibility, if the trust is constructed properly, to change the terms and transition the wealth.
What sort of insight do you have in the situation where a question here is that if the family member who will be taking over the farm has already put thousands in sweat equity and investments, but still cannot afford to buy at full price?
I love that question. You have probably just pulled 95% of the people on this call right into this conversation. Yeah. Listen, land costs have appreciated. Long gone is the day where the next generation would just go to the bank, get a loan, like a small loan, and buy the farm from their parents at full market value. The reality is land has appreciated tremendously in value, and the next generation just doesn't have the wherewithal, right? So they're really left with the other alternative, which is work on the farm and wait for someone to die and get it for free. What they don't realize is their parents are living vastly longer than any other generation. Remember that example I gave you about the 91-year-old and the 71-year-old? That is very common on the farm these days, right? You have farmers. Death was always the triggering event for the intergenerational transition of a farm. Well, the reality is we're living longer, and people are not willing, they're not patient. They're not going to wait till their 50s or 60s or 70s to get the farm. They want control now. So part of what I talk about in the book is, in my second book, Willing Wisdom, is this idea of actually taking money out of the farming operation, either loaning it or gifting it to the next generation, and asking them if they want to actually then buy the farm, right? So they can't say they don't have money because you just gave them money. Remember, gifts from one generation to the next generation are tax-free. So there's no tax consequences when we gift wealth to the next generation. But what that maneuver does is it gets the farm into one branch of the family, the branch of the family that wants to work the farm. The alternative is to not do what I just described, die, and then leave the farming operation to an equal share to all your kids. Some on the farm, some off the farm. Well, you know and I know that, you know, the kids off the farm, what do they want right away after their last parent dies? They're off the farm, they have no interest in farming. What do they want from their brother or sister? I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with funny. They want money, and it's not funny. And the farming operation doesn't have the cash. It doesn't have the liquidity to pay out brothers and sisters. And that is often why that family farm fails. The second reason is the last parent dies. They leave the farm to their children in their will. The children get a letter from, CRA, maybe not the land, but other assets have been triggering capital gains. Maybe there's a house on the property. Something is going to trigger a tax bill, and there often isn't the liquidity to pay. Right? Farming is in a little bit of a unique situation than other business owners, but still, there is often an inability to pay the tax on last to survive. That's causing big problems. And then, of course, the farming operation fails because they have a huge tax bill. And then the next generation wears the shame and the blame for blowing up their parents' farming operation, when in fact, it was actually designed that way. Either because of fear, indifference, or just a lack of curiosity on how to do this properly. And this is what we're talking about today. Here it is. We are talking about controlling the clock, right? It's about a business owner saying, I am not going to react to a health issue or a financial challenge. I'm going to get out in front of this. I'm going to control the clock, get out in front of this and put my plans in place and build it with my family's input and communicate what my final decisions are going to be so that there are no surprises. No surprises. Those are successful families.
Well, you're really touching on, by the questions that are coming in, it's a topic that really is top of mind for a lot of people. I'll summarize a couple of them here. One says that you say the farm should be sold at full market value, but if the farm operation is worth, pick a number, 20 million, 50 million, how can you afford it? And another asks a similar question. If full value should be purchased from the family, how do you deal with, in this case, increasing farmland values, right? How can a farm business pay for itself when farmland is, and again, pick your numbers depending on where you're in the country, 25,000, 30,000 an acre. So clearly people do have a lot of questions and concerns and stress about this.
Oh, okay, look, it is a big problem. But the first casualty of estate planning is perspective. We're talking about the division of a $30 million farm, $10 million farm, $500 million farm. We're talking about the division and the intergenerational transition of wealth. These are the right problems to have. There are other problems where families have nothing to transition. So perspective is the first thing. The second thing is, look, it is the oldest conundrum on the planet for farmers, right? Asset rich, cash flow challenged. It is a big problem, but the problem doesn't go away. The reality is if you've got multiple siblings, multiple children, right? And some are going to want money and some are going to want the farm. If we don't deal with it today, all we're doing is kicking the can down the road and the number gets bigger and bigger. It doesn't go away. It's just that you're not here to see the chaos and the litigation and the fighting and the tax bills. The reality is when you work with the FCC Advisory Services team, they'll tell you that you have a limited number of options to get out in front of this, whether it's the use of insurance to provide liquidity to pay out brothers and sisters or pay tax bills, whatever it is, whatever solution that's going to be right for you. It's a limited number of solutions. Educate yourself, get to know what they are. And then the earlier you start, the more affordable it is. Like, I love seeing young farmers in their 20s taking out small loans and buying, I don't know, 1% of their parents' farm, and then 3%, and then 4%, and then 6%, right? And then they can use the dividend stream from the farming operation to actually buy more shares, and then more shares. And the more shares they own, the bigger the dividend, the more they can buy shares. This only works when we get out in front and start early and use time. It's the families that wait till they're in their 50s or 60s, or they leave it too late. They run out of time. It's like trying to land a 747 on a postage stamp. You can't do it. So time is your friend, or it's your worst enemy. That's why I just think what FCC has done by trying to reach out to the young farmers to get them switched on to this idea of not just being a farmer, but being a farm owner, and starting that early and having that conversation frequently and often with their parents. Those are successful next gens.
That's nice intel. Let's not leave this topic yet, because again, clearly it's a hot topic for people connecting here today. Another question: some farmers keep the farm, and they keep buying more farms, even to the detriment of their own retirement needs or personal lifestyle. In every business year, or every family business, do you recommend taking stock of the business every year, and selling should be an annual decision? So I can see there's some complications here, but they're asking here, any thoughts as this relates to farm families? As you know, and I can see why this happens, and I know it happened with our farm. You know, the property across the road, we've been watching it for 30 years. Finally it came up. We probably couldn't afford it, but it's a once in a lifetime thing, and you do that. Any thoughts on this?
Whether it's a farming operation, a manufacturing operation, or a retail store, at the end of the day, your farming operation has a balance sheet and an income statement. It's a business. And like any business, it goes up and down in value. I mean, there are some businesses that go up in perpetuity, but they're rare. They're very rare. The reality is that, it is a business, and that the complexity for farmers comes from the fact that it is so emotional. Their identity, their sense of being, their family's identity, relationships, everything is wrapped up in their history. They are so weighed down by their history and that sense of what the community expects of them, that they often forget that it is, at the end of the day, a business. And that's part of my message. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of the family farm. In fact, quite the opposite. Farming families that don't heed the advice that I'm offering today, they really run the risk that someone else, right, is going to aggregate their property. It's been a story right across the country. Farms got bigger by preying on families that didn't plan. That's how you got bigger. You got bigger by buying broken family farms, broken families. And I just think it's high time that we consider a different approach. It is great. I love to see farm aggregation, but I also think that we should celebrate that farming family that might have had a 30, 50, 80, 130-year run, but for the next generation, they have different ideas and different ambitions. Why can't we celebrate that family equally?
That's pretty strong intel, really, because it is so emotional. I think of, this isn't a farm example, but I have an uncle, and he sold a cottage that he had, and their kids grew up there, and he eventually sold it as he got a bit older. And I remember saying to him one day, I said, I said, wow, that must have been really hard to sell the cottage. I mean, your family, they've got so many great memories there. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, and that's the way they're going to stay. And so I'm not saying that that's always the right thing, but it is interesting that sometimes that is an option to sell the farm. Do you give that advice sometimes?
Absolutely. And I remind people that Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, his father was a lawyer. Bill Gates did not take over his father's law firm. Is that a failed family law firm? Steve Jobs' father ran a restaurant. Is that a failed family restaurant story? Or is that the start of a next generation who was empowered and emboldened and encouraged to go off and pursue their own dreams? What I'm saying is, listen, a legacy, I think our greatest legacy is the depth and the quality of the relationships that we forge with our children. It's our family. Our family is our legacy. It's not a business. And that is a very difficult message for me to deliver to business owners. They take it very personally. But I can tell you that when I see a farming family start a conversation from a place of trust, and they ask the questions that I think need to be asked, and discover and unearth, no pun intended, a family next gen who doesn't want to farm. They have other dreams.
Yeah.
I just want that farmer to know that they have not failed themselves or their children. In fact, if they can embrace that conversation and give their children the permission to go off and be the people they're meant to be, that is a great gift to themselves and their children. That is a legacy. That takes wisdom and courage. And I love it when I see farming families do that. And I'm equally thrilled when I see the next generation go to a bank, borrow money, and buy the farm the old-fashioned way at full market value. Neither is right or wrong. It's the planning and the predictability that I love.
Yeah. That's really, man, that's solid because, I've run my media company for 25 years. I have no illusions that my kids have any interest in what I do. Just because this is my passion doesn't necessarily mean it will be theirs. And I'm totally okay if they do whatever they do, because that's their passion. So that's a really great message. Let's shift gears a little bit and get some capital gains questions in here. Question, I understand that there has been changes in lifetime capital gains. How will this impact our succession planning?
Yeah, so stand by. What looked like a slam dunk, Bill C-208 received royal assent. This is a federal bill, only to be replaced with a press release, I think last week, from the Department of Finance, asserting that the bill would actually not come into full force until January 1st, which is a first time thing that the Department of Finance has issued that kind of clarity. So there's a little bit of controversy around that, but I think the big message is that something is coming, right? Something that is coming that is going to try to put on an equal foundation the ability for someone to sell a farming operation to a family member without penalizing it. But prior to this, it was penalizing family members to be buyers as opposed to third parties. So I think the intent of Bill C-208 is to right that ship and make sure that family and third parties are on an equal footing from a capital gains point of view.
And so maybe you can tell me whether you can answer this question or not, because it is related. It's a specific question that they have a corporation, 2 shareholders. Does this mean 2 times the capital gains exemption, or has that changed?
I'd have to dig into there's a little more to that question. I would say seek proper independent legal and accounting, because it will depend on the lifetime capital gains room that's available. It's roughly $895,000. So someone may have used theirs. It's not quite that straightforward. I don't want to take a kind of very specific case study and bore a lot of people on this, but get proper legal advice. The point is, this is a good question. I'll tell you why it's a good question. I don't know, and I'll bet you that a chartered accountant is going to have to do a little research on that question. My point being that every farming operation is different. The number of outstanding shares may be different. The current share price could be different. I mean, will be different from your neighbors. Like every farm is different, but they're all confronted with the same issue. There will be tax triggered on sale. And even on death, for some assets, not just land, there is a deemed disposition that is going to trigger a capital gain. So listen, this is why it's crucial that everyone get proper current tax advice, especially in light of Bill C-208.
All right, now we get to the hard questions. If those haven't been hard already. And this is where it gets a bit sticky. So here's a question that we have a succession plan, but facing challenges with the next generation stepping back as they had agreed. How do we address this? So I assume they mean that they're now changing their mind or becoming hesitant.
Well, this is going to sound like counterintuitive advice, but if there has been a family meeting, if there's been proper documentation put in place, if the next generation's purchased shares, if they have put in place a share purchase agreement, which says, I'm just going to give an example, we are going to buy 5% of the family farm every year until we get control. If there's some reneging of those agreements or wanting to change shareholder agreements or change the terms, here is the hard part. Here's a very hard message to deliver. Sometimes, and I've seen it, the next generation simply has to say, if you are not going to honor the agreements, then we are not going to proceed and we are going to leave the farming operation, leaving the senior generation to figure out what their new succession plan is. There are some very challenging emotional psychodynamic challenges in family farms where parents never allow their adult children to actually grow up and be business owners, and they want to use the control of the farming operation to control their children's careers, their salaries, their lives. My advice sometimes is for the next generation, if that's dysfunctional and feeling unhealthy and it's putting stress on your own marriage and your own relationship with your own kids, then maybe it's time to leave the farming operation.
Yeah, wow, that's really insightful stuff. And nobody said this was easy, and I think it just highlights what you already said, was the need for objective third-party people that can sit in and give you perspective when you can't really see the forest for the trees. Here's a situation that's, I guess you'd say similar, except the reverse. The question is, what happens if a child decides to come back to the farm after a transition is already underway? Similar advice or something different?
So it's a really good question because often we conflate employment income with ownership. So if the farming operation can absorb another salary, they can afford to hire another employee, even if they are related by blood, that's different than owning, right? This is why I want the next generation to purchase shares at full market value, because working in the farm is different than owning the farm. Let me come back to a phrase that you used, and we kind of jumped over it. I did anyway. You used the word sweat equity. Kevin, I have met G2 farmers who believe that their parents should give them the farm for free because not only have they been worked and paid for, for their work, but they believe that they've worked so much overtime that or have been underpaid, not paid market rates, that they believe their parents should give them, that they've earned the farm for free. And so I've often asked those farmers, young farmers, well, how much do you think the family farm is worth? And they'll say, well, probably if it gets sold to a third party, about 10 or $15 million. I'm thinking, wow, that is some overtime rate.
Yeah.
I cannot find a legal or accounting definition for the word sweat equity. Listen, next gens, if you're working extra long hours and you're not being paid for them, that is not shares. That does not give you future ownership of the farm. Unless, of course, you're making, $495,000 an hour. or some outrageous amount of money. Listen, that is a negotiation. You need to make sure that you're being paid market wages. So employment income is very different from equity.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a farmer saying to me years ago, his son was working on the farm, he wasn't being paid, and I talked to the son actually, and I said, "How's that working out?" He said, "Oh, it's fine." He said, "We have an understanding." And I remember thinking after that, boy, if you have an understanding, you don't have anything, because that didn't sound good at all. So many questions coming in, so I just got to keep firing them at you, and we'll just do the best we can to get through them. Interesting question here. Just bought out a partner at full market value. How do I get money out of the farm business to enjoy life without sacrificing equity or efficiencies while paying off the partner?
There's only 3 ways that I know how.
Okay.
Salary, dividend, bonus. And all 3 have tax consequences. It's Canada. It's just the way it works. What I do know is that when we leave too much money in the business, we actually create farming operations that are too expensive for the next generation to buy. So actually getting money out, consistently out of the farming operation actually creates a farming operation with a little bit of leverage on the balance sheet, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The leverage reminds us that, it's a business. It's actually a business, that it can go up and down in value, and that you can be subject to risk. It's an investment. It's an asset subject to appreciate or depreciate in value.
Another capital gains question, and you may have covered this partially, but do you think that you should take your $1 million capital gain exemption when still alive? If so, and you're not ready to quit farming, is there a way to transfer some of the land to the children without them actually having to pay me to take advantage of the gains exemption?
That's a much bigger question than it looks. Again, a good specific question to address to their accountant.
Okay, and that's fair ball.
That
Go ahead.
taking the capital gains while you're alive is way more fun for you than taking it when you're dead.
Good insight.
That's been my experience.
Yes. What if you are a partnership, not a corporate farm? Dividends do not exist.
Right. It's maybe a good time to review the benefits of incorporating. There are many. A lot of people think that there's a lot of ongoing maintenance fee with corporations. The reality is, updating your corporate minute book, it can really be a small amount compared to the tax benefits, and there's just a few more ways of reducing tax and getting cash out of your business.
And so how does the corporation, there's a question here about how that a corporation impacts the succession plan. It says here we're a cash and livestock farm, cash crop and livestock, and we are incorporated. Both of our kids are looking to get into the farm business in the next 5 years or so. How does being a corporation affect the succession plan?
Well, it will. So right now, that corporation has a share price, and that family should know what that current share price is, and they have the ability to lower and raise that share price by managing the equity in the business, the retained earnings in the business. So if the plan is to sell that business, to sell the shares to the next generation, they can start to take money out of that corporation, and they can either loan it to the next generation, or they can give it to them as a gift, tax-free, and then ask them if they want to buy the shares at market value. Remember, they've taken money out of the corp, so the retained earnings come down, making the business actually more affordable to purchase. Also, the cost of insurance is reduced when we take money out of the farming operation. Remember, we're insuring the retained earnings, so insurance costs come down. There's a lot of benefits of not hoarding our wealth in the farming operation by getting it out slowly but consistently over the course of time, and transitioning that liquid wealth to the next generation, and asking them to then buy the shares based on a third-party valuation at full market value. But that
My thought, yeah, go. Finish
slow,
that.
slow and consistent. That this is not the turtle in the hare, right? You don't want to be the hare. You want to be the turtle that has a family meeting and a slow arc that's putting in place, right? There's an old expression, you can eat a cow one burger at a time. If someone, a farmer, parents say to the kids, hey, do you want to buy the farm for $20 million? The kids are like, I can't eat that cow, right? But slowly buying 1%, slowly, consistently, and getting them used to taking risk and acting and thinking like a business owner at an early age. That's like being an apprentice, not the operations. They know they're learning how to farm, but are they learning how to be a business owner? Business ownership is about taking risks and creating the opportunity for really exponential reward. You can't get one without the other.
Another question, my father and uncles have wills in place, but having difficulty getting them to understand the need for full estate / tax planning as part of completing our succession transition plan.
Yep.
Past advice has been overly complex. Is there any way to simplify this step?
Yes, maybe find a new advisor. Listen, it doesn't have to be complex. I think a farming family should be able to sit down with an advisor and ask a question in a very simple, basic way. And if they get $1 million answer back with big, long Latin words, find a new advisor. The very best advisor can break down this subject using common sense, basic language. And when someone says they don't understand something, without being made to feel silly or insufficient or dumb, find a new advisor. This is a subject that can be explained really broken down. In fact, FCC is making available a tool called the Willing Wisdom Index that I developed. And I've tried to do exactly that with this tool, to really break it down and explain what a will is, what a will is not, what's a power of attorney, how does it work, what is a healthcare directive, why is it important, and it just basic language. We don't need to be intimidated. I think that's why 12 million Canadians have thrown their hands up in the air and said, I don't understand this stuff. I'm sure my family will figure it out. They're embarrassed.
We should remind people as well that they will have access to the Willing Wisdom Index, and the link is going to be sent through to you so you can get a bit of a sense as to where you are in this process. Here's a really good question. This is a very insightful question. Asking a young guy, how do you start the conversation when some siblings are too young to know if they even want to be part of the farm? He says, I'm in my 20s and I want to farm, but my brothers and such are younger and in early high school and are not sure yet. So what do you do in that situation?
Well, I really like that question because it reminds us that the need for a family meeting. Can you imagine that scenario where we have a young farmer in their 20s, brothers or sisters, maybe in their teens or even younger, meeting with their parents with an advisor present, so a family meeting, talking about the future of the family farm. What an opportunity to explain to those younger farmers under the age of 18 that if they were to join the farm, that they would be paid as an employee. But that if they wanted to buy the farm when they're in their 20s or 30s, like slowly, small percentage, begin to buy the farm, that they could do that. Do you know how many young farmers, 7, 8, 10, 13, 14 years old, that are thinking, if I don't go to college or university, if I just join the family farm, I will own the family farm. Not because it's been explained that way, but because they're making assumptions that working on the farm equals farm ownership. This idea can percolate. It's like a seed that gets planted and watered for 20 years. And meanwhile, you could have parents who are thinking, oh no, we're going to sell this farm to a developer because we're on the edge of town. And instead of selling this farm for $8 million to our kids, we're going to sell it for $80 million to the developer. But they're not having that conversation. And this poor kid has not gone to college. He's just thinking, I'm going to join the farm because I'm going to own the farm, because that's just who we are. We're farmers. And that's how farms, isn't that how all farms transition? We just wait for someone to die and we get it for free.
Speaking of that, is there a limit to what you can gift a family member? In this case, the person's in Ontario.
Gift?
Yes.
There's no inheritance tax in this country. This is what makes Canada very different from the US. In the US, they have capital gains tax and an inheritance tax. I think the threshold is around $11 million can be gifted in the US. And then an inheritance tax applies. So, but in this country, there is no inheritance tax. You can just,
all right,
unlimited amount of money coming out of your corp, and you pay the tax there, and then that gift to the next generation is tax-free.
I'm not sure what this question is. They're simply asking, how do you handle the oldest farm member that doesn't want to transition and the youngest who wants to transition ASAP?
I understand the question, but I don't understand the question. But I understand what's behind that question. There is this,
okay.
It's kind of a linear question. It's like the oldest, like farms should transition, to the oldest boy or the oldest period. I remember doing a radio phone-in show I was in Regina. It was the most fascinating lunchtime phone-in show. It makes great entertainment, by the way, this farm transition. And this youngish lady phones in and said, my father left the farm to my oldest brother, and he was given very clear instructions to take care of his sisters. Well, I can tell you, he didn't give us anything. He grabbed the farm, and we haven't spoken since. This idea that somehow, like, it's kind of an old-fashioned patrilinear, like, farm to the oldest boy or to the oldest sibling. It doesn't work. And not only that, but it's also running parallel to, the Family Law Act. Wills are being challenged. It's just, families need to get at this stuff and have these conversations. But that's kind of what my approach avoids. It doesn't matter how old you are, where you sit in the birth order. If you want to buy the business, you buy the business. And if you want to have a brother or sister as a partner, then get together with them and talk about what that looks like, both in terms of operations and how much you're willing to buy. And remember, that money is going to your parents. And when they die, that money is probably coming back to you. So you're risking your money, maybe bank money or savings, to buy that business for a short period of time. And then you ultimately get a discount, right? If the will is structured like 99% of all wills, which is we divide our cash equally among our children. It works. It's actually the transparency that is the gift.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another question here actually about that full market value stuff. You really touched on it. Sounds like we could do a whole program about that. They're asking if you could explain the concept in this case of senior partners gifting cash to the junior partner to provide them with an opportunity to purchase shares in the farm. The comment here is, we're getting a lot of skepticism about this concept of buying the farm at full market value, that it can actually work.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, it's an operating business with a balance sheet and income statement. It has to work. And actually what I'm talking about isn't that radical, because the share price of the farm on last to die there's a deemed disposition of those shares. So there's a calculation anyway, right? For tax purposes. So really here's the bigger idea though. It's the risking of capital that tests the real commitment of the next generation. You know how many young farmers are actually pretending to be committed to the farming operation? Because to leave the farming operation is to run the risk that they'll be disinherited. when you can actually, today, in real time, test that ownership commitment by asking someone to assume risk, taking on debt to buy those shares. That is the ultimate test of commitment. If the next generation doesn't want to risk capital, they don't want the farm. Why wouldn't you find out now? Why would you design an estate plan to thrust a business to someone for free? Who's going to say no to a free farm? What I'm describing is that approach is the creation of an economic incentive. And when we dangle money in front of people for free, we are going to get exactly the response that we want, which is not necessarily the right response.
Right. We've got just a few minutes left, so we've got a handful of questions, and I think we'll get through them, hopefully all of them here. I have no empire aspirations in my succession planning. 2 children farm and work off farm. 2 others do not. How do I think we've heard this before, but it's worth revisiting. How do I treat them all equitably that allows for the survivability of farming goals?
Yeah, again, I would go back to that mechanism where you start to take some value out of the farming operation, and then you can actually start to transition some of that wealth to your children, equal amounts of cash, tax-free. And then do the one next step, which is to ask all the kids if they want to return that money that you just gave them to buy the shares at full market value. You may find out that none of them, even the 2 kids on the farm, may not want to be owners. They may just like their job, right? But what you're going to do is you're actually going to get that farming operation into the 2 branches of the family that it ought to be in. Because on death, the kids outside the off farm, they want money. They're going to, as soon as a parent is dead, they're going to ask their brothers and sisters to cough up their share of the family farm in cash. And there's no liquidity. There's no ability to do that without impairing the farming operation and impairing the future relationship among those kids.
1, 2, 3, about 3, 4 more questions, and we'll wrap up here. What is to be done when the corporation is the only cash vehicle and the land is all owned by mom and dad? Do you buy the land or buy the corporation?
Again, that's a much larger question to offer. So you'd have to look at their entire holdings.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Farmers will buy a new plot of land or equipment that generates money, but are hesitant to hire a professional to facilitate family meetings. Boy, did you plant this question? The question is, any advice how to talk to families about getting an advisor and paying for an advisor?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to be clear, I mean, I don't do family facilitations. I mean, okay. I don't charge for that. I mean, I wrote these books, but there are some phenomenal family business consultants, facilitators who are, oh my gosh, they make these family meetings sing. They make it look so easy. I mean, people don't even know how they're doing it, but they just know how to keep the conversation on track. They know how to take a fairly volatile issue and kind of warehouse it over here, and they just keep things moving. They make progress. They hold people accountable. There's action items. Next thing you know, this family is pushed through this awkward conversation, and they have a plan. And I don't know, did it cost $2,000, $3,000, $8,000, $12,000? It's a bargain. Do you know what $12,000 gets you in the way of legal fees when you got 2 siblings who are unhappy? It gets you like 2 letters that accomplish nothing. Like, seriously, this is not the place to cheap out. In fact, I would argue that the way in which you transition the farm can be as valuable, if not more valuable, than the farm itself. People will remember the lengths, the wisdom that their parents had to make sure that the family thrived and remained functional and working long after their parents are gone. That's the place to start estate planning. How do we build a family that works well when we're not here? There, that's how you start. And then work backwards from that. That's going to be a successful farming up. That's probably the farm that does last 100 years.
And you know what? Those of you who have been listening to Dr. Dean, you go, wow, he covered so much stuff there. Just remember, this is being recorded, so you can basically play it back as many times as you want and listen to all those nuggets of wisdom that are buried in there as many times as you want. Comment if you can about what do you think of the idea of the senior generation funding the purchase of the farm rather than having the kids go to a bank and such?
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't have to be and or.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be both. But here's what I would say is that those secret little side deals that you have with one child, that secret loan, you loan them money so that they can go to the bank and leverage that to, take on more debt. Whatever you're going to do, please, please trust me when I tell you that there are no secrets in family. In the fullness of time, all is revealed. And when someone has been given something ahead of someone else without it being disclosed, a gift, a loan at a discount, something, and people are grieving, it is like a Molotov cocktail. That is how most estates unfold in this country, right? And I'm telling you, that's when the farm transition plan falls off the rails and everyone, it just devolves into chaos. Please, the point that I'm making is whatever you do, have that broader family conversation. Strip away the secrets and all the side deals and have a fuller family conversation. Have someone there taking minutes. Have someone there, if someone agrees to do something, write it down. It's the accountability. It's good governance, good family governance, good family business governance. This is how the Richardson family became one of the most successful agricultural stories in Canada. They didn't get lucky. They worked at it. They worked hard at it. And they relied on their advisors, and they had family meetings, and they took minutes, and it was just best practices. Yeah. And that's why they're still here.
Well, just two final comments here. The polling that has been going on behind the scenes as you're talking here, Farm Credit asks, do you have regular family business meetings? 27% said yes, and almost 73% said no. Does that sound familiar or exceptional?
Yeah, it does. So first of all, okay. Here's the paradox, Kevin. The people that should have been on this call are probably the people who need to hear this the most. The fact that people are actually listening are curious about this subject. So despite the fact that only 71% still need to have the meeting, at least they're here. Yeah. At least they're here and they've committed an hour of their time to broaden their perspective, educate themselves on the subject, and maybe 20 or 30%, right, more kind of take on this as a little bit of a goal, a professional goal that they set for themselves in the next year. Yeah. That's fantastic. That's a good use of our time today.
Nice. Yeah, final comment when we were talking about meetings and that sort of thing, and this is actually one of the questions that came in, and that is there such a thing as too much transparency?
No.
When in meetings? No?
Absolutely not.
Really?
Because you see, in our family meetings, I'm 59 years old. I've been to 54 consecutive family meetings. I can always tell you that as part of our family mission statement, we're also reserving the right to amend our estate plan at any time. So just because we're communicating what our current plan is, doesn't mean that we can't change it. Yeah. If something catastrophic happens to one of our intended beneficiaries and they immediately come off the rails or get themselves into financial problems because of some problem that we didn't know of when we built our original estate plan, we always reserve the right to change. But what I can tell you right now, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, our two kids married 32 years, our two kids, 28 and 26, they know exactly how our assets are going to transition. They know where it is, how it's invested, how much, who gets what. There are no surprises. But they also know that we reserve the right to change that at any point.
Good way to end it there, Tom. And interesting, it was for me personally, it was 10 years ago this week that my dad passed away. He was a farmer. And I recall sitting with him, about 10 years before that. And he, at that time, still hadn't told us about his will. And I remember sitting with my sister and I said to him, I said, we don't want anything from you except the gift of certainty. And I tell you, that was so valuable to us in the transition process. So Dr. Tom, thanks so much for helping us gain traction and getting folks taking that first step toward creating a gift of certainty.
Well, Kevin, thanks for hosting, and I really enjoy. You're so knowledgeable on this subject, and I think our audience is the beneficiary of that. It was really fun time, and I hope helpful for lots of people. Thank you.
And thanks also to you folks that have been watching this. A reminder that if you have registered, you are going to receive an email, and it's going to have several links that I'll point out real quick. There's a link, as I mentioned, to the recording of this. So if you missed some of those more in-depth and technical type answers, just watch them back at your leisure or forward them to family or friends if you'd like to do that. Also, you're going to receive a link to complete your own Willing Wisdom Index, as Tom referred to. Again, this is a tool that really just helps you see where you're at in the estate planning process and help you be guided, I guess, to what maybe your next step is. There's also going to be a link in there to an evaluation of this event, so you can give feedback to Farm Credit to how to improve in the future. And there's also a link, there's lots of them in there. There'll be a link to what some people call, and I happen to be one of them, a link to the secret weapon to running a business in this day and age, in this day of disruption. And that, quite frankly, is having a peer group. And it's something that I did myself a number of years ago, and it was one of the best things I ever did for me personally, but more to add clarity to my business. It's about having perspective and avoiding blind spots and bouncing ideas off of people who have similar challenges. So if you've ever wondered about this idea about joining a producer peer group, if you join Farm Credit Canada on July 22nd, and again, it's called Why Should You Join a Producer Peer Group, and learn how this one simple action really can be the secret sauce that drives you forward. And so many people I see in the area of learning talk about that networking and peer advisory is the way to learn in the future. And for more information on that event, visit fcc.ca/events to register.